President Trump, we are told, will have a phone conversation tomorrow with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. This, of course, follows their historic summit aimed at trying to rid the regime of nuclear weapons. The president did say that another issue was discussed during their meeting, that of human rights. But critics are saying human rights should have been more prominent during the summit, and that the president was not tough enough on Kim's horrific human rights abuses. Here is how he responded about that.
You have spoken so passionately about the circumstances that led to Otto Warmbier's death.
Yeah.
In the same breath, you're defending now Kim Jong-un's human rights records. How can you do that?
You know why? Because I don't want to see a nuclear weapon destroy you and your family.
Well,
okay?
and by the way, you've declared
I don't want to see,
nuclear threat from
excuse me,
North Korea
because
is over.
I don't want to see a nuclear weapon destroy you and your family.
Yes
How
or no
can
question?
Kim love his people if he's killing them?
I can't speak to that. I can only speak to the fact that we signed an incredible agreement. It's great. And it's going to be great for them,
But
too.
why not?
So what are those abuses? Well, Professor Walter Hatch joins us. He's the director of the Oak Institute for Human Rights at Colby College in Waterville, Maine. Professor, first, how would you rate the human rights record of Kim Jong-un?
Well, first, thanks for inviting me on, Eric. I would say that the human rights record in North Korea is perhaps the worst of any country in the world. It's truly atrocious.
Any country? The worst?
Yeah, I can't think of another that has a worse human rights record. This is a country that has up to 200,000 prisoners detained at any one time in 4 different gulags around the country. People are executed right and left for being political dissidents or simply not being sufficiently loyal to the regime. Kim Jong-un has had his uncle executed. He's had his own brother murdered. This is not a nice regime.
Yeah, talk about a bit about the prisons. We have some pictures of those. They're called concentration camps. And there are even reports that, like, if your grandfather defied the regime, defied Kim's grandfather, well, the whole 3 generations of a family could be imprisoned for their whole lives in these political prisons?
That's one of the most remarkable things. It's not just individuals, but entire families are detained. And during these interrogations that are conducted, torture is routinely used. Women are raped. Again, this regime is extraordinarily bad in its human rights record. And there's an official policy of discrimination. The Songbun policy that the North Korean regime uses identifies particular groups, Christians, landlords, people who are seen as somehow advantaged, are under especially close surveillance. But in fact, everybody is surveilled closely in North Korea. If you're lucky enough, and very few people do have access to telecommunications or the internet, all of those kinds of communications or electronic activity are routinely monitored by Bureau 27 of the state security. This is a regime that takes no chances with its people, that brooks no dissent or even mildly questioning behavior.
Yeah, the State Department had a pretty shocking report last year. Let me read you some of that. It says that the government engages in, quote, killings, forced labor, torture, prolonged arbitrary detention, rape, forced abortions, and other sexual violence. Forced labor and mass mobilizations, re-education through labor camps, et cetera, et cetera. It says many of the country's human rights abuses underwrite the regime's weapons program. And it continues by saying that includes the forced labor in those mass mobilizations, re-education through labor camps, and overseas labor contracts. Thousands of North Koreans are sent abroad every year to work in slave-like conditions, earning revenue for the regime. How do we address this? Does the president raise this further, stronger in his conversation tomorrow with Kim, or should it be raised on a lower level? You know, he says primarily the goal is dealing with nuclear weapons. But what should we do trying to change this behavior?
Well, this will sound odd coming from the director of a human rights program. You know, at Colby College, I direct the Oak Institute for Human Rights, but I actually agree with the president, with President Trump on this, that human rights probably should not be front and center of these negotiations. We're trying, after all, to broker some kind of peace agreement or disarmament plan, trying to persuade the Kim regime to improve its human rights record, I think would not be fruitful at this point.
Do you think?
On the other hand,
yeah.
I just don't understand the kind of discourse or rhetoric that's come from our president, where he's praised Kim Jong-un as smart and talented and funny, has said that he has the best interests of the North Korean people in mind, that he loves his people, that he wants to take care of them. These kinds of statements are patently false, and I don't think they do anything but legitimize one of the world's most brutal dictators.
And finally, quickly, Otto Warmbier, the young man who was brutally tortured and basically murdered in prison. Should the president or the administration at some point bring that case up? It is close to the president's heart, we are told, to prosecute the killers of Otto Warmbier. Tell Kim to prosecute this young man's murderers.
Again, I hate to sound cold, but I'm not sure that it makes the most sense right now to put Otto Warmbier's case on the table. We could also, I mean, this is what Prime Minister Abe of Japan has been pushing for, is talking about the almost 20 people from Japan that were abducted, actually kidnapped from Japan by North Korean intelligence in the late 70s and 80s. I mean, there's so much that a United States president could insist on, but I think that needs to come after some kind of movement towards normalization of relations between these two hostile countries begin.
Professor Walter Hatch at Colby College, director of the Oak Institute for Human Rights, thank you for joining us. And perhaps they'll focus on the nuclear issue right now, as you say, and eventually get to the human rights issue and see if there is a change in their behavior. Thank you.